Good morning, Sam. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing good. We've been had a nice little time out in the garden with the yard and the leaves and all sorts of
Oh, it's so beautiful
uh,
outside.
time with the family over the weekend. It was great, and we're just got to meet with the youth last night, which is always a treat. A really great group, and yeah, I'm doing really good, and I'm excited for our guests today. Well, one of the reasons that I'm excited so much for our guest today is the youth. Is one of the incredible things about this moment that we're sharing at First Church is it's really built on, everybody's really sweet about the staff team, which is great. But the more incredible thing to me, in addition, is so many volunteers who are serving in so many ways. And John Howe is with us today. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Chris.
And the incredible thing about John is the many different ways that he served over the years. Even in this very moment, we have the real gift of John's leadership with our youth, which is wonderful, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But in addition to that, I've also gotten to work with John on finance. When I first came during the candidating weeks, John was working on the capital campaign and then is on the finance committee, and then also has been in our choir and in the Linden Singers, which we've worked with a bunch during the pandemic, and so many videos and just so many things. And now, especially interesting for this moment, has been working on our history project. And because this winter, our theme is holding history, so we'll get to talk a little bit about that too. But anyway, welcome, John, and thank you for all of this that you're doing and so much more.
Yeah, welcome, John.
Well, great to be here and great to be involved in all these ways.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe just tell the story a little bit about how you guys came and how did you find First Church in the very beginning?
Oh, well, that's an interesting story, Chris. We've been at the church since the mid-'90s. I think we first came in the fall of '95. And I actually think about my movement into the church in several different phases. Both Teresa and I grew up in other mainstream churches. And it was probably in the mid-'80s, I think 1985. I remember attending my first UU service with a friend of hers when we lived in Washington, D.C. The great preacher David Eaton gave a sermon that probably remains the most influential in my life. His theme was based on the first spoken words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. And to those who are familiar with their Bible, they know the first words he spoke was, "Follow me."
Wow.
And when Eaton gave his sermon that morning, he said, how different would history have been if the Christian church had focused on how to follow Jesus, not worship him?
Wow.
How many wars have been fought? How many lives have been lost over how to worship Jesus, not follow him? And that's something that has stuck with me for all my life.
Yeah.
And so over the next few years, I thought about it. We gradually became disaffected with the churches that we were involved in. And it was actually when our daughter was in nursery school at the UU Church in Arlington, First Parish. She was in the Sunshine Nursery School. One day I just picked up a raft of flyers off the rack as I was waiting for a student-teacher conference or parent-teacher conference. And I didn't even look at them for a couple of days, but I remember the moment one night when Teresa was cleaning up in the kitchen and I'd already gone to bed, and I started reading these flyers. And I remember calling out to her from the bedroom, "Come here, you got to hear this.
Wow.
This is you." And after about 30 seconds, I said, "Oh, this isn't just you. This is me." And so I've always told my friends at church, don't underestimate the importance of those tracks on the rack in the foyer. So it still took us a little while to come to First Church. We moved to Belmont in 94. We loved our church in Arlington, continued to go there for a year. But when we realized our kids' future was in Belmont, it really was time for us to make the move too. And so we came to our first service in the fall of 95. I think it took me one service of hearing Victor Carpenter, our beloved minister and really a very influential man in my life, to decide this was our community. And then I would say there was one further stage. There was a special person in my relationship with the church, and that was Nancy Holland. Nancy was Alpha's assistant director in the choir. I loved the music at First Church. And when our son told me, "Dad, I'm involved in so many things at school and in scouts, and he was involved in science and debate and all these things. And he was also a chorister." And he said, "I've got to give something up. I think it's going to be choir."
Wow.
Well, I was terrified how to tell Alpha that our son was pulling out of the choir. And so I had to tell her, "Alpha, I want to make a trade. My son has to lead choir. Can I join yours?"
Wow.
And it was Nancy who really integrated me into the choir. I would say the choir became my first family at the church. And through that experience, it broadened into a fuller relationship and involvement in all these other ways. So those are kind of the stages of my transition into First Church.
And was the witness exchange accepted by Alpha? That worked out?
Oh, it worked out beautifully.
That's great.
I
love that.
have been a devoted member of the choir all these years. I've never missed a major music. I think Ian's doing a fabulous job,
Right.
and the music is has always been a very important part of my involvement in the church. But one thing I will tell you, Chris, is I found in the early years, I got to know the backs of people's heads because we were up in the loft.
Right.
And so it was a longer period for me to sort of build out relationships and connections. I did join the board in the early 2000s at a frenetic period in my career. And I was never that involved in leadership decisions during my board term, but I did start to get more involved in other activities and have had a role in finance, led stewardship, and of course, most recently, the capital campaign. So one thing led to another, and over the time that we've been at the church, it's really become a very central part of my life.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to pick up on. I want to begin maybe especially with the music. What is it? You connect in musically. One of the things I've really loved singing mostly years ago when I was in choirs before, serving as minister. But there's just something so beautiful to singing with a group of people. I've found that I've really, I've loved singing when we've been outside in those outdoor services. But there's just something different when you're in a choir and you're singing together, and you can get to that point where you can hear your song and your part along with the others all at the same time. I really loved that. What has been sort of your favorite part of singing in choirs?
Well, I think it's just that. It's choral singing is often called, it's ironic, especially during this period of pandemic. Choral singing is considered by many to be the most health-giving form of musical expression.
I did not know that.
Yeah, when we're involved in a chorus, we're breathing. There's a lot of spirit of fellowship and laughter in the choral experience. And if you're in a choir with several people on a part, oftentimes one or another member of a section will flub a line, but there are others that can pick up. It's not like you're the one piccolo in the orchestra who has to wait 243 beats and come in right on time.
Yeah.
And so it's studies have shown that choral singers really, it can extend life, it can lower anxiety.
Wow.
And it's ironic because of the nature of this pandemic, that choral singing is one of the musical things that we have not been free to do. And it is really one of the things I miss the most about the past couple of years is singing together.
Yeah.
We've done, Ian and the team have done yeoman's work to put things together so that we have choral music. But I just can't wait till we can get back together.
Yeah, it's one of the things I really missed also. And like you said, it was incredible what our music team was able to do with you and so many others. And the Linden Singers too. How long have you been in that group?
Well, I guess Alpha kicked off the Linden Singers back in. There was a recording of the First Church Choir and a couple of tracks by the Linden Singers in, I believe, 1997.
Oh wow!
And back at that time, actually, my friend and neighbor Roger Reed invited me down the street to do a little singing together. And a few years later, when there was an opening in Linden Singers, I think our bass soloist had moved on. I joined, I think, in 2002. So We've been together. I've been in the group 20 years. Our particular foursome, I think it was 2005 that we started singing together. So it's 17, 18 years, and we've become very fast friends as well as musical collaborators.
That's great. Well, and listeners, if you haven't heard, on our YouTube page, there's a playlist, and it's from the music committee, and there's a bunch of Linden Singers videos there on that playlist. It's one of my favorite parts of our YouTube page, actually, is there's a whole lot of the incredible music that folks made during the pandemic. The other thing I wanted to pick up on what you said, which was so beautiful, way at the beginning, those first words of Jesus, follow me. And what would Christianity look like? What would the world look like if people had followed and tried to emulate instead of worship? Which is just a fascinating question to me. And especially in our church. I mean, Unitarian Universalism right now, so many people, new members, Sam and I get to, visit and get to know the new folks on their way in. And it really comes up a lot. They're like, why is there all this Christian imagery in the church? And I think, people, just don't know that we were historically Christian and that we've just been continuing to broaden our theological identity and base. But I think a lot of those early Unitarians and early Universalists, I think we're trying to do exactly that. We're trying to really ask, what would it mean to follow the example of Jesus? What would it mean to really listen to his teachings and really try and not just worship him, but, try and follow him? I appreciate that.
Yeah. And in fact, the covenant of our church from its very beginning mentions coming together in the spirit of Jesus.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we not forget the incredibly influential role that this one man has played in all of human history.
Right.
So I consider, coming from a Christian heritage, I consider Jesus to be a model figure and, the most, one of the most influential individuals in all of human history.
Yeah.
Although my own personal theology has evolved. I grew up, reciting the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed. And I think I could probably string together 30 words of that creed that I still hold to be true. And much of it I can no longer accept intellectually.
Right.
But I consider being a Christian to be part of my personal heritage.
Yeah.
And I've evolved sort of a personal trinity. I tell people in many ways, as much as I am a member of the UU Church, I think of myself as a Christian ecological humanist.
Oh, fantastic.
And I don't think that any one of those sort of three legs of a tripod. I don't think any one of those is dispensable for me.
Yeah.
That being said, I know others come to our church from different heritage.
Yeah.
And others might be a Muslim ecological humanist or a Jewish ecological humanist. And I think we find more in common from the other legs of that tripod. I think we share a common concern for humanistic values.
Yeah.
We many in our church are deeply concerned about ecological issues and how we as humanity treat this planet, this temporary home of ours. But I think for me, Christianity was the lens through which I learned to view the world, and it remains an important part of my personal heritage.
Yeah.
But in our church, it's how do we meld and integrate all of these perspectives into a community where we all, although in the words of Franz David, we may not believe alike, we all can love alike.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And I think one of the ways in to me is to, really learn and understand the particularities of each other's personal theologies. And that's kind of been one of the fun things about this podcast, is really digging into that with a lot of our folks. So can you say a little bit about what you mean about those other two legs, particularly the humanism? Because I think it's super fascinating.
Well, humanism is a long-standing tradition, certainly in Western Europe, going back to, really to the classical era, but particularly since the late Middle Ages. And I know there is a movement in our country and across the world called secular humanism. Right. I'm actually involved and a member of some secular humanist organizations, and I believe it's important that we champion humanist values, recognize the equal dignity of all people, cultivate a sense of the importance of voting rights in our democratic society. But I sometimes take umbrage at the emphasis on secular humanism, sort of a flattening of the perspective. Many secular humanists can be militant atheists and don't want to see a role for churches in our society. I think that churches of different perspectives play a crucial role in our society, and we need to welcome religious diversity, but we need to have a focus on those common the values that are championed by humanists. I think need to be at the heart of our civil society.
Yeah.
So that's why I say I think of this personal philosophy of mine very much as a tripod.
Yeah.
It would not stand without each of three legs. And likewise, I believe very deeply in environmental, the need for us to take our environmental stewardship of the earth seriously. But there are those that would place an emphasis on environmentalism to the exclusion of those other values.
Yeah.
And, I think there's dangers in going too extremely in that direction as well. So I think cultivating a sense of a personal philosophy in life is very much a matter of balancing competing values and priorities. Given my own training was really mostly as an economist, a lot of life is about striving for balance. And
that's interesting. And I'm interested that you put ecology at the heart of your theology as one of those three legs to the stool. What for you is specifically theological or ethical about the ecological leg of that? Well,
Sam, I think we may be living at a culminating moment in history that I think the roots of our current ecological crisis go back not just one or two lifetimes through the era of reliance on fossil fuels, but in some ways, 1,000 years back to the dawn of economic growth in Western Europe, or even back, 5,000 years or more since the dawn of human history. I think we as humans, our instinct is to think primarily of our own immediate needs, and people were generally able to satisfy their needs, their immediate needs, when the world's population was small and broadly dispersed, but through most of history led relatively meager lives. It's only in the last 2 human lifetimes, with the exploitation of fossil fuels, that we've reached this point where an unprecedentedly large global population is living at a standard far above the standards that most people lived at in centuries past.
Yeah.
And we've, I think, realized in our lifetime that it is not sustainable and that we need to make drastic changes. And it's obvious how difficult it is. I mean, we've just seen the very difficult negotiation that took place in Glasgow and led to, I think, on balance, a very unsatisfactory outcome from the most recent COP summit. We are at I think at the moment where, if we are going to protect the future of life on Earth, we now need to make drastic changes in our energy arrangements and water, food production. There's so much to be done in the immediate decades ahead. And I don't think we as a religious community would be responsible if we did not place ecological concern at the heart of what our community is about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I was last night with the youth, when we were gathered with the youth, I was talking with one of the other people there, and we were talking about just how clear they are about the importance of this as a question. And I was mentioning to the person I was talking with, my 11-year-old, and he was saying, Daddy, it's good we live where we do. And I thought he meant, it was nice to be living in Belmont and be starting to make friends and getting grounded in our new house. And I was like, yeah, I'm enjoying it here too. I'm glad you are. And he said, no. It's good that we live on a hill, because when the sea levels rise, we won't be flooded and die.
Oh boy.
He's 11, wow.
Yeah.
And it's just in the back, and we weren't talking about sea levels, and we weren't talking about, climate crisis. It was just what he was thinking about. And I think that's true for so many of our youth, and really all of us. Like you're saying, John, I think it's a crucial question for us all now. And certainly, one of the great things I've been really appreciative of our FCB Green group and conversations around how we can, further our work with this for the church on so many levels. So yeah, it's definitely crucial. Well,
I had a foretaste. I just briefly, Chris, yeah. I had a foretaste of this when I was a teenager myself. I came of age. I grew up in it was a comfortable, affluent town, and I was a typical kid in the 60s, early 70s. I fell in love with cars. I had to drive a car as part of my first job. I learned to drive when I was 12.
Wow.
I used to do maintenance on a tennis courts and drag a brush to sweep the courts at night.
Wow.
So I couldn't wait to get my license. I think one of the pivotal events in my life was just within weeks of getting my driver's license. The Yom Kippur War of 1973 took place.
Wow.
And all of my dreams of being that American Graffiti teenager, with the Beach Boys on the radio, all of those dreams went up in smoke, and I found myself waiting in gas lines to fill up my parents' station wagon every Saturday morning at 6 a.m.
Wow.
And I lost my love of cars, but after a brief moment of thinking, Lord, why me? I realized this was much bigger than me.
Yeah.
We were at the dawn of a new era. There was a lot of debate in the 70s. Was the oil shortage real or contrived by the oil companies to generate policy changes to support their agenda. And I always thought it didn't matter. What really mattered was in the long term, we were facing a period of adjustment.
Yeah.
And throughout the last 40 years, my career has been in energy and energy policy and technology. It's been ebb and flow, but it's clear now we are at a crisis moment, and we have to sustain the momentum. In the last 10 years, there's been dramatic technology advances.
Yeah.
I think of the new solar system that we have on our parish hall roof, as that is a real statement of our church community that we need to go in this direction and we need to do more. But I think, for all the back and forth of the last 50 years, the evidence is now clear. We really have to step it up. And fortunately, the technologies are there. What we need is sustained public will to move forward. And so I've been really appreciative of the energy that the FCB Green team has put behind this to get us to divest of fossil fuels, to make the investment in the energy system, and to continue that progress so that we can model what needs to be done for others in the community of Belmont.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. And actually, one of the things that we're working on with Rayanne, our new director of youth ministry, around service learning opportunities, is we have the beginning of a wonderful partnership with a group called the Sustainable Harvest International. That we're, again, just getting to the point of firming up details, but we'll be able to have youth service trips and adult service trips. And what they do is they partner with small farmers in Honduras, Panama, and Belize, and they help teach them sustainable agricultural practices. Folks who used to do slash and burn agriculture, which releases tons of carbon, and instead they create small farms that actually trap carbon. And so they're having substantive effect on climate change, which is really amazing. And so partnering with organizations like that are doing good work and leveraging all of our own individual choices, we can really make a pretty huge difference. So along with Rayanne and this incredible team of folks, how has it been working with our youth?
Well, it's been really eye-opening for me. This is my third year as a mentor, and I remember back to the fall of 19 when I first joined, thinking what a joyful place for these kids to come and really be able to let their hair down and relax with each other and connect at a very deep level. But it was within just 4 or 5 months of my taking on this role that the pandemic happened. And of course, we all had to go remote. And it was, I know, very difficult to sustain the energy of the youth group during that period. And I have realized just how heavily the burden of the pandemic has fallen on our youth and young people, our high school, college, and young adults. So this fall, with Rayanne's arrival and with the reconnection and the resumption of in-person meetings, it's been a delight for me to see the kids get together again. They clearly love being together, and so there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of laughter. It's really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I always love coming in and seeing them and seeing all that energy. It's pretty remarkable. Well, and then the other big piece of what you do is, we mentioned some of the history, but I think you are now, the torch has been passed officially. I think you're now the official church historian. Am I right?
Well, that is true. Jim Landfried he sort of took on the role in an unofficial way and produced our wonderful 150th church history back in 2006. And I've learned an enormous amount. I continue to learn an enormous amount from Jim.
Yeah.
But now that the church is open again, at least in a limited way, I've been able to start to delve into the archives and learn a lot more about our early history, our history through the mid 20th century. And one of my goals is to put together representative materials from our archives that will really help to give all interested members and friends a sense of how we have evolved as a community. There have been several efforts since the foundation of the church to produce histories. And what's interesting is to see how our self-understanding as a community has evolved through time.
Yeah.
Going back to 1906, there was a wonderful 50th anniversary sermon, and another at 75 years. There was a huge centennial celebration in 1956. And again, in 1990, the 100th anniversary of our beautiful new sanctuary building. We're in our second building.
Wow.
And then Jim's history. So those are examples, but also to learn more about the individuals who served as settled ministers at our church before your tenure, Chris, and to learn about some of our illustrious lay members, the leaders of the church, other members who were leaders in society, in government or academia or industry and other fields. We are a church with an amazing, rich history.
Yeah.
And I just personally feel it's a real privilege to have been invited to take on this role to really dive in and learn more about it. It comes for me at a pivotal moment in my life. I'm coming up age 65 and sort of trending out of the workplace. And so this is an experience that I hope will be a significant part of my time in the coming few years.
Well, and I'm so grateful that you mentioned Jim. We are deeply, deeply in his debt for his long, voracious, and extensive thirst and sharing of history. And if any of the listeners haven't read the first 150 years book that Jim created, we have some copies right near my office. Feel free, come by, check it out. It's a real gift that Jim has given and continues to give, because along with you, John and Sam, I think you're in this group too. We have a First Church History group that's happening.
That's right. We're meeting monthly with John. The staff members are Lillian and I. And anyone listening is very welcome to join this group. We're having monthly discussions of First Church history, and we're trying to plan some programs together. And it's a very stimulating group, and you're very welcome to join. If you're listening, just get in touch with us.
Yeah, and the theme, we have these seasonal themes this year. We're doing 3. The fall was cultivating relationship, and the winter is holding history. So in worship and in programs and in lots of ways, we'll be digging into this question of history. And then spring will be awakening will be the theme. But I think I love what you're saying about history too, John, especially at the church, because, we're in the middle of a really fascinating moment of our history. When you think about it, it feels like we're doing so many things so differently. And we've had this whole multi-platform experiment for the last year and a half or more. We've been really stretching out in so many different directions. And, it's part of a larger pattern, right? I mean, email came to the church at some point. The internet happened as a thing, and so I feel like churches are always constantly in the process of evolving and meeting the moment that surrounds us. And one of the beautiful things, I think, is as much as so much changes, so much is still the same. You mentioned a worship service from 70 years ago, and like we had all of these rites of passages. Last night at the youth meeting, you showed me that thing about youth ministry, however long ago, many decades. And it's one of the beautiful things, I think, is that there are these cycles of history, and some part of the purpose of the church remains constant through them, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, has to be.
Yeah. Well, so one of the other things that we've asked folks, our guests on the pod, was about our sources and principles, and if there was a source or a principle that extra resonates for you today, or anything you particularly appreciate.
Well, Chris, I have, over the years, I've spent time studying our principles and our sources. And I've come to the view that they are all indispensable.
Nice.
And yet there is one that has always resonated with me, and that is our final principle: respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. I cannot tell you how many times especially in the last 10 or 15 years, when Teresa and I often at night, we talk about problems in the world and the situation with the environment, with healthcare, political crises, matters in our own lives. And at some point in the conversation, she or I will say to the other, it's all connected. And we just, how many times have we said that? It is all connected. You can't tug at a thread without it affecting the whole fabric. And I feel that way about our environmental crisis and its links to our larger economy, to the matters of justice in the world. And so I think that's the one that really connects with me. And yet all of the others are so important. And in this time of real crisis for democracy in America, I think the respect for the equal dignity of all people, for respect for the democratic process, is so vital. This is a pivotal moment for our country. And I felt, that we came to the Unitarian Universalist Church in the early 90s at a time that was, I would say, looking back, a rising tide for the spirit of religious liberalism in the country. But I have felt over the last decade or two, maybe after 9/11, after the Great Recession, after the tumult of the last 5 years in this country, the tide has been going out on religious liberalism. There is a rising sense of illiberalism in the world. We hear about it in countries around the world that are going in the direction really of fascism. And we have to ensure that our tradition remains strong. We are a tiny religious movement in the entire country. And yet, if you look back over 150 years, we exerted a vastly disproportionate influence in this country. And I think it's important that we find ways, really, as a religious movement, to increase our influence in the world at such a critical time.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said around this moment, and I feel when I see our folks coming to the church for the first time, and I see people finding us nowadays, especially in the context of the pandemic, especially in the context of, like you say, these last 5 years, I think people are really hungry for this gift that we have to give. And, for a big chunk of 15 years ago, starting 17 years ago, I was serving a church in Berkeley, California. And let's just say Berkeley, California isn't exactly starved for the same saving message of Unitarian Universalism in quite the same way that somewhere that's more culturally conservative, we had basically the bumper stickers in our parking lot were on a lot of cars in Berkeley, California. And still, even then, there is this real powerful saving message that we have, and even only more so now. I have a colleague over in Dedham Massachusetts. And, we were talking, and there's like a huge alt-right population in Dedham, all around us,
Really?
all
I
around
didn't
us.
know
This
that.
isn't something that's far away. This isn't a red state thing. This isn't, like you say, this illiberalism is all around, and even here in Belmont. And so I think it's a real important moment to be able to speak up and act up for dignity and love and all
Yeah,
that.
and I would say that I mean, John, your interest in history and your historical work, for me, understanding history is part of the same project as resisting illiberalism, because including in religion as well as in politics, because part of this sort of illiberal kind of Christian nationalist movement that we're seeing in many countries around the world, including here, it's about creating this fantasy version of the past to wish to get back to. And an antidote to that is to understand what the past was really like, that the past was a much more complex, diverse, internally conflicted kind of work in progress than the fantasy that Christian nationalists and right-wingers and illiberals like to imagine. Here as well as elsewhere. So.
Well, thank you so much, John. This was really super fascinating, and thank you for everything you're doing on so many levels. It's been a real joy to get to work with you and to hear from you and get to know you even more. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you, Chris. I've really enjoyed the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, John. This was great.
All right. Well, Sam, that was fascinating.
Yeah, that was fascinating. John is a really interesting guy.
This was such a good idea. Huge shout out, Rayanne Mason, our director of youth ministry and our social media and digital ministry consultant. She had this idea, and it's been the foundational ideas. Everyone is fascinating, and just talking. I knew John was great, but that was really, really wonderful conversation. So as always, if you have questions you'd like us to take up, send them in, minister@uubelmont.org. We'll be rounding out this first season, and we'll be bringing you another season later in the spring. But thank you as always, Sam. Sam has put a bunch of time into this. By the time you actually hear this, by the time you hear these words, Sam will have put a whole lot of time into this. And it's a real gift. And I'm really grateful. And for you for listening. And we'll be together the next time. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everybody.